At a wedding, the groom provocatively thanked me in his speech. My husband finally understood why. I've replayed the months leading up to that wedding more times than I can count, trying to pinpoint when I started becoming the kind of woman who did the things that I did. But now I'm coming to realize that maybe I was always that woman, and that what happened was maybe inevitable, something years in the making that I couldn't have stopped. Things between Drake and I haven't always been perfect. For starters, we'd been friends for years before we even considered dating. He'd always been a super nice, reliable guy, the kind of guy every girl said they wanted but never actually chose. I guess, for a long time, I was one of those girls. I liked him, sure, but I never liked him like that. Not in the way that gave you butterflies or made your pulse pick up when he walked into a room. He was just Drake, my friend, familiar and harmless, until one day he wasn't. It's hard to explain how those lines blur, how you go from seeing someone as a friend to noticing so much more about them. I don't even remember who kissed who first. All I know is that once it happened, it was like a switch flipped. Suddenly, all the years of comfort and closeness between us turned into something else entirely. Something new and exciting that we'd both never realized was there. But it didn't take long for me to notice another side of him. Just a few months into dating, the little things started to show, and I realized that Drake had a jealous side. It wasn't anything dramatic, not at first, just small things. Little warnings that I brushed off as care because while I'd always been told I had a type, guys who were unpredictable, reckless, and more than a little toxic, Drake, for all his possessiveness, wasn't that. If anything, his jealousy felt almost sweet in the beginning. He cared too much. That was what I told myself. He was just protective. After all, what was a little possessiveness compared to the chaos I'd known before? And, to be fair, we got past it, or at least learned how to manage it. He learned to trust me more, and I learned how to reassure him without getting upset. We figured out a balance that worked. I made a habit of telling him where I was and who I was with, not because he demanded it, but because I knew it made him feel better. And he, in turn, tried not to let his insecurities cloud the good parts of what we had and make him jump to crazy conclusions. For a long while, it felt balanced, not perfect but functional. We understood each other, and we knew our weak spots. But then, a few months back, that balance started to tilt again. It wasn't anything obvious at first, just tension that sat between us, the kind that turned small disagreements into arguments. But honestly, to say that our problems began only a few months ago would be lying. Because the truth is, Drake's insecurity had always been rooted in how we began. He didn't always say it out loud, but I knew. I knew that a part of him always struggled with the way our story started and with who came before him. For context, Drake and I have been part of the same friend group for over a decade now, the kind of group that's been through everything together. We were all tied together in one way or another and bound by years of shared history. Before Drake and I got together, he was just another member of that circle, practically like a brother to me. Back then, the only person who had ever really been on my radar was Mikey. Mikey was the glue that held us all together. He was the one who'd introduced half of us to each other in the first place. And he was just the kind of guy everyone gravitated toward. He had this easy charm and the ability to make anyone feel like they were the most interesting person in the room. I met him in college. We became friends quickly, and through him, I met the rest of the group, Drake included. For years, Mikey and I had this strange, flirtatious tension between us. Nothing ever official, nothing anyone could point at and call a relationship, but it was there. There were lingering looks and late nights, and jokes that felt a little too real. I was practically in love with him back then. And it was a kind of love that made you rearrange your whole life around someone else without even realizing you're doing it. Eventually, I forced myself to get over it, or at least tried to. I told myself he didn't see me that way. He never said as much, but I could feel it. He'd flirt, tease, and make me feel like I was different from everyone else. But when it came down to it, I was just one of the people orbiting around him, just another person that inflated his ego. So I tried to move on. Except then, after college, things changed. We started spending even more time together. More late nights and moments that felt like maybe I hadn't been imagining it after all. Eventually the lines blurred, just like they always do, and the boundaries I'd set up faded away. Mikey started giving me the kind of attention that was hard to ignore. He'd go out of his way for me, and he treated me like I was his girlfriend in every way that mattered, except officially saying so. And I let myself believe that that meant something. Everyone else in our group joked about it, calling us the mom and dad of the group because of how we looked out for everyone and had this weird on and off romance. And I think that in some twisted way, that label made me feel secure, like I had some kind of claim to him, even if it wasn't spoken. Eventually, we took things to the next step. Not in a dramatic, romantic way. There was no confession or grand moment. It just happened. One night turned into two turned into months, and before I knew it, we were sleeping together regularly. But we still weren't together. He never introduced me as his girlfriend, and we didn't go on dates. It was just this unspoken arrangement that was really only hurting me in the end. I told myself it was fine, that I was being chill and that I didn't need labels, but the longer it went on, the harder it became to ignore how empty it started to feel. A year passed, maybe more, before I finally reached my breaking point. I confronted him one night in his room and just straight up asked him what we were doing and what I meant to him. He didn't dodge the question and he didn't lie. He just looked at me for a long time and said, as gently as he could, that while he did like me, he just didn't like me enough. Not enough to date me or want to actually be with me. Not enough for it to be something real. And that was it. There was no fight or argument, and luckily I didn't cry in front of him. I just nodded and left. But inside, something cracked. I'd spent years believing we had this amazing connection that meant something, only to realize it was one-sided all along. For weeks after that night, I barely left my apartment. Everything reminded me of him, the songs we used to listen to, the restaurants we'd gone to with our friends, and the group chat where his name still popped up like nothing had happened. I wasn't angry. Not necessarily. I just felt hollow. It felt like grief, only worse, because it wasn't even a real relationship. Our friends tried to rally around me, though. They all knew what had happened, and most of them sided with me, or at least made it known whose side they were supposed to be on. And for a while, Mikey became persona non grata. Like he stopped showing up to hangouts and other things and went quiet in the group chat. Everyone was careful about mentioning him around me, which was both comforting and exhausting. I didn't want to talk about him, but I also hated how their carefulness reminded me that I was the one he'd rejected. Still, the sympathy didn't last forever. They got tired of choosing sides. Slowly, Mikey started slipping back into the group and showing up more. They all missed him, so his return was very welcome, while I was expected to just get over it. It stung, of course, but I couldn't really blame them. I didn't expect anyone to hate him just because I was hurt. What did surprise me, though, was Drake. If I'm being honest, I'd barely noticed him before that. Sure, we were friends, but in the hierarchy of closeness, he was somewhere near the bottom. But after everything with Mikey blew up, he was the one who stepped forward. He was the one who called Mikey out directly, and didn't get back to being friends with him as soon as the rest did. He checked in on me constantly in the months that followed. He would bring me food, text me throughout the day, and take me out on walks so I could leave the house. He just genuinely cared. It started as comfort, but slowly, something shifted. It wasn't some grand revelation or gesture that made me start seeing him differently. It was a whole range of things. The way he listened, the way he looked at me without pity, and like I was the prettiest girl in the room, the way he treated me like I was worth something. All of that. And one day, I just realized that I looked forward to his texts more than anyone else's. And then one night we kissed, and that was how it started. Dating him felt safe and comforting. The complete opposite of whatever it was that I had with Mikey. In time, what happened with me and Mikey became ancient history in the group. And as the years went by, Mikey slowly re-entered my life. It was bound to happen. We all shared too much history for it not to. We weren't exactly friendly, just civil and cordial for the sake of the rest of the group. Drake, though, never fully got over it. He never said it outright, but I saw it in the way his shoulders would tense when Mikey was around me, and the way his tone would shift if I ever brought Mikey's name up. I'd reassure him every time, remind him that Mikey and I were over, and that there was nothing left to worry about. And for the most part, he believed me, or tried to anyway. Years passed and we built a life together. We got married, moved into a house. We moved on together and things were good until a few months ago. It started with a phone call. At that time, I hadn't spoken to Mikey in maybe a year or two outside of group messages, and I hadn't seen him in even longer. But then suddenly, there his name was on my screen and he was calling me. It made my stomach twist into knots and I almost didn't answer, but curiosity won. He sounded the same, just like the Mikey I'd always known. We caught up for a few minutes before he told me why he'd called. He said that he'd met someone, the love of his life, he called her. He was getting married. I congratulated him, of course, even though it felt strange to hear those words from him. For years, I'd imagined what it would be like to see him settle down, and I'd always envisioned that it would be with me. I didn't know how to feel when the call ended. When I told Drake about it later, he didn't take it well. He asked why Mikey had called me of all people, what exactly we'd talked about, and whether there was some kind of hidden motive. I told him there wasn't, that Mikey was just being friendly, and that it wasn't a big deal, but the look on his face told me he didn't believe me. "Don't talk to him," he said eventually, his tone calm but firm. "There's no reason to." I agreed, mostly to keep the peace, and also because I wasn't exactly itching to talk to the man who'd broken my heart. But as the days passed, Mikey kept reaching out. He wanted to catch up some more and just talk. I ignored him at first, but after a while I just couldn't. I wanted to see him. I told myself it wasn't about him, that I just wanted closure. And maybe a part of me wanted to finally hear him say what he never said back then, that he was sorry or that he'd been wrong, or even just that I hadn't imagined the connection we had. So I met up with him. We picked a small cafe, one we used to go to back in the day. He looked older and a little softer around the edges, but still very much Mikey. The same easy smile and loud laugh. The same way of making me feel like I was the only person in the room when he talked. We ended up sitting there for hours. It wasn't awkward like I'd expected. It was familiar. We talked about old times and about our friends, about how much life had changed since college. Eventually, he brought up what I'd been pretending not to wait for. He talked about the way things had ended between us. He didn't sugarcoat it. He admitted he'd been immature and that he'd handled things terribly. Said he hadn't been ready for something serious back then, that he'd been scared of ruining our friendship and ended up doing exactly that anyway. Hearing him say it after all these years hit harder than I expected. I'd convinced myself I'd moved past it for so long, but sitting there in front of him, it all came rushing back. When we finally got up to leave, he hugged me. It lingered a second too long, but I didn't pull away. On the drive home, I couldn't stop thinking about how easily it had all come back, the way we fell into conversation like no time had passed, and how he still knew exactly how to make me laugh. I told myself it was harmless, and that it was nice to have that kind of familiarity with someone after so many years. What I didn't realize then, and what I refused to see, was that I'd already stepped onto the edge of something dangerous. When I got home that night, the house was quiet, even though Drake's car was already in the driveway. I called out to him, and when he didn't respond, I figured he was probably upstairs, maybe getting ready for bed. But the second I stepped into the bedroom, I knew something was wrong. He was sitting on the edge of the bed with his phone in his hand, staring down at it like he'd been frozen in place. His jaw was tight and his shoulders tense. I greeted him and then asked if he was okay. He didn't answer right away, but eventually he looked at me and it was obvious he was upset. "Where were you?" he asked. I froze for half a second before I decided to lie and forced a smile. "Dinner," I said quickly, "with my brother." He looked at his phone again and then at me. "Your brother," he repeated. I nodded and ignored the way my heart was pumping. "Yeah. You know we haven't seen each other in a while, so we grabbed something to eat." He just stared at me for a few seconds, then leaned back slightly. "Why are you lying to me?" And that caught me off guard, and my immediate reaction was to double down. "I'm not lying." He didn't argue. He didn't raise his voice. He just held his phone out toward me. I grabbed it from him and looked at the screen. It was the group chat. I glanced down and immediately felt the blood drain from my face. There it was, a picture of me and Mikey sitting in that cafe, smiling with each other. Mikey had sent it along with a message that read, "Guess who finally got reunited?" followed by a few laughing emojis from the others. For a moment, all I could do was stare at it. I'd completely forgotten he'd even taken the photo. It had felt harmless at the time, and I'd completely forgotten that Drake didn't want me to see him in the first place. "Why'd you lie?" he asked, his voice quieter than it had been, but still strained. I swallowed hard and sat down beside him on the edge of the bed. "Because I knew it would make you upset," I said finally. "And I didn't want to fight. I only met him because we're still friends at the end of the day, Drake. He wanted to talk, and I thought it would be rude to ignore him." He laughed bitterly and told me that what was rude was Mikey laying a trap for me to get involved in his life again, and me walking right into it. It told him that it wasn't like that, but he just shook his head. "It's always like that with him," Drake snapped, and his voice got louder. "You think he's changed? You think he suddenly respects you? He can't help himself. He's an asshole, and he knows exactly what he's doing." "And you?" He stopped then and exhaled sharply, like he was trying to control himself. "It'll end the same way it always does, with you getting sucked back into his bullshit." The words hit harder than I expected. I blinked at him as I tried to process them. They hurt, and it was too late to keep that hurt from showing. "Wow," I said finally, my voice shaking. "You really think that little of me?" "I think you don't see what he's doing to you." "No," I said. "You don't give me any credit. You still treat me like I'm 21 and stupid and can't think for myself." He started to say something, but I didn't let him start or finish. "You're my husband, Drake, not him. I'm not sneaking around with Mikey. I'm not doing anything wrong, and yet you're still jealous, even after all these years. Why? Why does he still get to live rent-free in your head?" "I was in love with you for years," he said quietly. "From the second Mikey introduced us, I knew I didn't stand a chance, but I still fell for you. And I had to watch, year after year, as you clung to him like he was the only person who mattered. You were blind to how he treated you, and it killed me to see you embarrass yourself over someone who didn't even want you." Those words hurt more than they should have, probably because they were true. But it hurt to admit it to myself, much less hear them from someone else. "So, that's how you see me," I said finally. My throat was tight. "As some hopeless, lovesick girl who'll always ask how high the second Mikey says jump?" He didn't answer, but his silence said it all. It was all just too much in that moment, so I just grabbed my bag and walked out. I heard him call after me, but I didn't stop. My hands were shaking when I got into the car. I didn't even know where I was going at first, just that I couldn't stay there another second. My brother's place was only 30 minutes away, and before I knew it, I was pulling out of the driveway. The drive felt endless, and my mind was spinning the whole time, looping through everything that had happened. I felt anger, guilt, and confusion, all tangled together in a way that made it hard to breathe. I thought about how nice it had been to see Mikey again, and the way it had felt like stepping back into a version of myself I hadn't been in years. I also thought about Drake's face, the hurt in his voice, and how little he seemed to think of me. But worst of all, I thought about the part of me that had wanted to see Mikey, not out of friendship or closure, but out of jealousy. When he'd called and mentioned that he was getting married, something in me had twisted. It wasn't that I wanted him back. I think I knew better than that, but I couldn't stop wondering who she was and what made her different. What made her enough when I hadn't been. And sitting there in that cafe, hearing him talk about her, I'd been grateful that he hadn't gone into detail, because I didn't know how I would have reacted to hearing about this woman, the one he'd finally decided was worth everything I wasn't. The realization made me sick. By the time I pulled into my brother's driveway, my chest felt heavy, and I didn't know what I was feeling anymore. I just knew that everything had gotten messier than I ever meant for it to, and somewhere, beneath all the noise in my head, was a truth I didn't want to face. I thought about how maybe Drake was right, and maybe I hadn't really let go of Mikey after all. The next morning, the guilt hit me like a hangover. Worse than a hangover, really, because at least with a hangover, I could blame the alcohol. This one was entirely on me. I hated when we fought, and I hated that I had lied to him, but his words hadn't been easy to swallow, so at the same time, I wasn't feeling particularly apologetic. When I got back to the house, Drake was in the kitchen making breakfast like usual. He glanced up when he heard me come in, smiled faintly, and said, "Morning." "Morning," I whispered back. My throat was dry and my stomach twisted at the sound of his voice. I wanted to say something, but I wasn't even sure what, whether to apologize or tell him that I was upset. Before I could say anything, he spoke first, and he told me that he'd been thinking about the previous night and how we left things. He admitted that he shouldn't have snapped at me, that he'd let his jealousy get the best of him, and it wasn't fair. I just stared at him, stunned, while he sighed, rubbed the back of his neck, and said I could see Mikey if I wanted. He told me that he knew he'd said things he shouldn't have, but it wasn't his place to tell me who I could or couldn't talk to, especially someone I'd known long before him. For a second, all I could do was stare. I'd expected anger, suspicion, maybe even distance, not softness, not effort to trust me again after everything. I should have felt relieved, but all it did was make the guilt and confusion heavier. "I'm sorry too," I said quietly, "for lying about where I went. I didn't want to fight, but you don't have to worry. I doubt I'll even see him again. And even if I do, nothing could happen. That part of my life's over, completely." I said it so convincingly that I almost believed it myself. Drake's face softened. "Good," he said. "I trust you, okay? I really do." He reached out and squeezed my hand, and I nodded. "I know." After that, he pulled me in for a hug, and it all would have been fine if I didn't feel like I was still lying to him. We ate breakfast together after that, and it felt weirdly normal, almost like a reset. We talked about work, about maybe taking a short trip soon, and a bunch of other things. It all flowed so easily that for a brief moment, I actually thought that maybe that night with Mikey could stay buried forever. I thought the whole situation with him could just be a bump in the road in our relationship. But of course, nothing stays buried when it comes to him. A few days later, Mikey texted me again, asking if we could meet and talk like before. I stared at the message for a long time, thinking about what to do. I'd promised myself I was done, but my heart betrayed me like it always did, and I felt this need to see him again. So I told Drake. Maybe as some attempt to prove to both of us that I could be honest? I don't know. He hesitated for a bit before he told me that it was fine and that I should just be careful. "I will," I said, and I meant it, even though I didn't really know what being careful meant anymore. When I met Mikey that evening, it was at the cafe from the last time. He was already there, waving me over with that same boyish grin that had once made my heart race. The conversation came easy again. It was like our history gave us some shortcut to comfort. We caught up on little things, from work to our friends. He even briefly discussed the wedding planning. At some point, I mentioned Drake, just offhandedly, and Mikey made a face. "Drake's a good guy," he said with a kind of secretive smile, like he was the only one who understood a joke. "Just never thought he'd be someone you'd go for, you know?" I laughed, even though it was kind of mean, and asked what he meant. He explained that Drake was very safe and predictable, and he'd always imagined me with someone who could keep up. "Like you mean?" I said, half teasing, half serious. He smirked. "Maybe." I playfully smacked his shoulder and fought hard to pretend I wasn't secretly pleased by his words. I hated that he could still make me feel like that with one offhand comment. He told me about his job then, about how much he'd been traveling over the last few years. Then he revealed that that was how he'd met his fiancée, Annalise. It was the first time I'd actually heard her name. The first time we'd met up, he'd talked about her so abstractly, it was easy to forget that she was an actual person he was going to marry, but hearing her name made it all feel much more real. He went on about how they'd met at a bar during his trip to Lisbon, and how it had been love at first sight for them both. I smiled through it all and said the obligatory, "Oh, that's nice," where necessary, but inside I felt like I was spiraling. Then he showed me a picture, and my heart sank even more. She was stunning. I wanted to hate her, and a ridiculous part of me did, but all I could think was, of course she's perfect. I couldn't stop thinking about how I'd known him for years, known everything about him, loved him through it all, and yet I'd never been the woman he wanted to settle down with. Instead, he'd gone off to a different country, fallen in love with some random stranger, and had proposed, all in under 3 months. I tried to push the bitterness away, but it clung to me like wet clothes. I couldn't fight the jealousy or the anger I was feeling, and I guess he must have noticed that I seemed uncomfortable discussing her because he suggested that we just try to avoid discussing our partners and just keep the conversation between us. So we did. I let him change the subject, and soon we were back to talking and laughing over drinks like we were in college again. One drink turned into two turned into three, and when I went home that night, I couldn't stop smiling. Drake noticed it immediately. He asked if I had a good time. I told him that I did, and then he said that he was glad to hear it in a tone that suggested the complete opposite, but I was too happy to let his mood bring down mine, so I ignored him. After that, it became routine. Mikey and I would text, meet for dinner, and grab drinks when we could. It was supposed to be just friendly hangouts, just rekindling things with an old friend. But the truth was that I started looking forward to those nights too much. Drake started noticing too. He didn't say much at first. He would just make these small, passive-aggressive comments like, "It's like you see him more than you see me these days." Or, "Maybe I should start joining you two since you're practically best friends again." I'd roll my eyes and laugh it off, but deep down I knew he wasn't wrong. I knew that what we had was flirting dangerously close to something I would regret. Still, I told myself it was fine and that Mikey was just a friend, that I was strong enough to keep things where they should be. But the more I saw him, the more that old pull started to draw me in. It was like I was helpless to it, like I had reverted back to my younger, obsessed self. Then one night, everything cracked open again. He'd asked me to come by his apartment after work. It wasn't unusual at that point. Sometimes we hung out there when we got tired of restaurants and when Annalise was away. But this time it was late, later than I'd ever gone there. I hesitated before saying yes, but I still went. When I got there, he opened the door with that familiar smirk. He greeted me the way he always did. He said, "Hey, stranger," and when he opened the door wider, something just told me that there was trouble waiting for me inside. But I stepped in anyway. We talked, like always. Then we laughed and we drank. It was what we always did when we hung out. But somewhere between the third and fourth glass, his tone shifted. "I don't know if I'm ready for this," he confessed suddenly. I asked what he was talking about, and he explained that he's not sure about the wedding, and he doesn't know if he's making a huge mistake. I started to tell him that it really wasn't any of my business, but then he cut me off and continued. "Being around you again has messed me up," he said. "I thought I loved Annalise. I really did. But being around you has made me realize that I barely know her. She barely knows me, not like you do." He paused for a moment, took a deep breath, and finished his drink. "And I thought I was in love with her, but now I'm not sure. What I feel for her doesn't really come close to what I feel when I'm with you." My heart stopped. He was saying all these words I'd always wanted to hear at the worst possible time, but it didn't stop the butterflies in my stomach. Looking back now, I realize how ridiculous I must have looked. He shifted closer, and his eyes never left mine when he said, "I need to be sure I'm not making the wrong choice." And then he kissed me. I should have stopped him. I should have pushed him away, but instead I let him. I kissed him back with all of the emotion I'd tried to bury for years. Being with him again felt like sinking back into a good dream, one you don't want to wake up from. The world shrank to just the two of us. Every voice that had ever told me this was a bad idea disappeared. I couldn't think about anyone but him. Not when the kiss got more heated, and definitely not when we were taking our clothes off. For a split second while we were having sex, I thought about Drake's words and how I might still be a lovesick girl. Afterwards, there was this strange quiet between us, and for a second, I actually felt smug, like some twisted part of me had finally won him. Like Annalise might have the ring, but I was the one who had him questioning things, the one who made him betray her. But the feeling didn't last. As he drifted off beside me, reality hit. My chest tightened, and the smugness melted into horror. I couldn't believe what I had done, and that I had betrayed Drake. I got up quietly, grabbed my things, and slipped out before he could wake up. The whole drive home was a blur. My hands shook on the steering wheel, and my face was wet with tears. When I got home, the house was dark. Drake was asleep. I couldn't bring myself to crawl into bed beside him, not when I felt so dirty and undeserving, not after what I'd done. So I went to the guest bedroom and I laid there and cried. The weight of what I'd done and who I'd betrayed him with pressed down on my chest until my throat felt tight. I'd brought his worst fear to life, and I'd barely even thought about him while doing it. I'd promised myself and Drake that I wouldn't get sucked back into Mikey's life, and yet there I was. Mikey didn't even have to do too much. I jumped down the rabbit hole willingly. The next few days were a blur of guilt, panic, and something that felt dangerously close to satisfaction. I hated myself for even feeling it, but it was there. There was a small bit of pride in me, because for the first time in the history of Mikey and I wasn't the one being toyed with. I wasn't the one left wondering what I meant. Now it was his turn, and instead, I was the one causing confusion and messing up his life. Every time my mind went back to that night, the way he'd looked at me, and the way he'd said he wasn't sure about marrying her, I felt this twisted sense of victory. Not because I wanted him back. God, no. I knew better than that. Mikey would never be the man I needed. Drake, for all his jealousy and flaws, loved me more than anything. Trading him for Mikey, who only ever gave me half of himself, barely that really, would be beyond idiotic. But still, I couldn't help it. The thought that Mikey might finally realize what a mistake he'd made years ago, and that he might actually call off his wedding because of me, gave me this sick kind of comfort. Like maybe I'd finally gotten the closure he'd stolen from me back in college, and maybe I had finally given him just a taste of his own medicine after what he put me through. Except I hadn't. A week later, the universe made that painfully clear. It was a quiet morning when I saw the envelope. It was nestled among a pile of bills. It was this thick, cream-colored paper with gold lettering that practically screamed, "Special Occasion." I didn't even have to open it to know what it was, but I did anyway, and my stomach sank before my fingers tore the seal. Inside was the wedding invitation. My name embossed in elegant cursive right beside Drake's. A small note apologized for the short notice and explained that it would be an intimate ceremony for only their closest people. Closest people. I stared at the stylized card for so long that the words blurred. The invite came just 2 weeks to the wedding. I'd actually convinced myself it wouldn't happen, and that I'd been the thing to make him stop, to make him consider ending things. When Drake came up behind me and asked what it was, I handed it to him without a word. I couldn't speak. He read it quickly, then chuckled under his breath. "He's really doing it," he said, shaking his head. "I swear, Mikey's crazy. Barely knows the woman, and he's already tying the knot." I murmured my agreement, but my mind wasn't there. I could barely breathe, because in that instant it hit me that nothing had changed. Mikey was still getting married. He'd slept with me and had still chosen her. And I'd betrayed my husband for absolutely nothing. Not that I'd slept with Mikey just for that, but it had at least been a consolation. Now I didn't even have that. That night I sat in the dark living room long after Drake went to bed, replaying everything in my head. Every word and touch and every stupid choice that had led me there. I wanted to scream. I wanted to find a way to undo it all, but that wasn't possible. Then, the next day, to make things worse, Mikey's text came in. It was this long paragraph apologizing to me and telling me that we shouldn't have had sex, that he's sorry for dragging me into his confusion. He explained to my humiliation that his night with me had, in a roundabout way, made him realize that Annalise was who he truly wanted. He loved her, but just got caught up in nostalgia. He ended it by saying that he hopes he will still see me at the wedding. I read it once, then twice. By the third time, the words blurred behind my tears. Of course, it ended like this. It was almost poetic how I'd come full circle. Years ago, he told me I wasn't enough to date or actually be with. Now, after everything, he was basically saying the same thing, just with different words. I'd thought I'd finally taken some control away from him, and that I'd had power over him for once. But it turned out I was just the same fool I'd always been, and once again, he held all the cards. There wasn't anything left to do but keep it all quiet then. I had to keep my secrets so I could protect my marriage with Drake. I told myself that I just needed to act like nothing was wrong, and then get through the wedding. After that, I could finally put it all behind me. So when the wedding day arrived, I put on a dress and makeup and went to watch the man who'd ruined me promise forever to someone else. The venue was beautiful. It was small and intimate, All our friends were there, along with some faces I hadn't seen in years. Everyone was buzzing with excitement, taking pictures and sipping champagne. And me, I just wanted to go home. Everywhere I looked, there were reminders of what I'd lost and what I'd done. Eventually, the music started and the ceremony finally took place. When it was all said and done, they were both standing at the altar. Annalise looking gorgeous, and Mikey smiling like he hadn't destroyed me twice in one lifetime. By the time the speeches started, I was barely hanging on. All I wanted was to leave. When Mikey finally got the mic, he stood up with his champagne glass in hand, already more than a few drinks in. He started out normal enough, talking about love and timing and how grateful he was to have found his person. I rolled my eyes at that part, but then his tone shifted. And, he said, glancing around the room, I'll be honest, I had my doubts about all this. People chuckled, and Annalise smiled up at him like it was something to be happy about. But, he continued, his voice slurred just slightly, an old friend reminded me recently that the grass isn't always greener on the other side. He turned then and looked straight at me with this smug smirk. I froze in my seat. And for that, he said, smiling that smug little smile, I'll always be grateful. So thanks for your service and your very effective methods. He said my name in front of everyone at the end, and then he winked. But it wasn't even directed at me, but at Drake. Everyone laughed, assuming it was some harmless inside joke. But Drake went completely still beside me. I could feel the tension radiating off him. My stomach turned to ice. I reached out and whispered his name, but he pulled his hand away. He didn't say a single word for the rest of the night. He didn't touch me or even look at me. He just sat there with his face blank until the end of the reception. Drake has never been one for scenes, so it made sense that he stayed polite and quiet. He even smiled when people spoke to him, even though I could tell that he was angry. I could see it in his jaw, in the way he clenched his glass so tightly I thought it might shatter. When we finally got home, he didn't even wait for me to take my shoes off. He tossed his jacket onto the couch, ran a hand through his hair, and said, How long have you been fucking him again? The words hit like a slap. What? I choked out as I felt my face get hot. Don't play dumb. He turned to face me, his expression pure rage. How long? I opened my mouth to lie, but the look on his face, all the rage and the hurt, made the lie die in my throat. So instead, I tried to beg him and tell him that Mikey was just joking around, and that he didn't actually mean anything, but he didn't believe me. I swallowed hard, and there was nothing I could do to stop my voice shaking. It was once, just once, I swear. It meant nothing. I just got caught up in everything, and I'm so sorry. He laughed. That's even worse. He halted at me. You betrayed me. You made me look like an idiot in front of Mikey, and for what? For nothing? He shook his head. You made me believe you were over him. I thought you'd grown up. I thought we'd moved past this. I begged him and tried to get him to understand that it was all a mistake and that Mikey had confused me, but he wasn't having it. Just don't, he said. I should have known you'll always be attached to him. I hoped maybe you changed after what he put you through, but you're still the same clingy, desperate girl who can't let go. Still chasing scraps from a man who never wanted you. He tried to leave then, and all I could do was try to hold him back. I couldn't deny what he had said because it was true. So I tried to keep him with me. He just pulled his hands away from mine, looked at me for a long moment, then shook his head again. I'm not even surprised, just disappointed. Then he brushed past me, grabbed his keys, and walked out. I ran after him, crying and begging him to stop and listen, but he didn't. He slammed the door, got in the car, and drove off into the night. I didn't follow. I couldn't. I sank to the floor with his jacket and sobbed into the fabric until I could barely breathe. Every ounce of strength I had was drained out of me and replaced by this deep, suffocating regret. I waited for him to come back the next morning. I told myself he just needed to cool off and that he'd come home eventually. But he didn't. He wasn't back the day after either. I called and texted, but nothing. I couldn't ask our friends or his family. I had no idea what he had told them, and I couldn't risk them finding out that I had ruined everything. So I stayed quiet, pretended everything was fine while my world quietly fell apart and Drake drifted further and further away. It's been over a week now since the wedding, and still nothing from Drake. It's like he just vanished and slipped out of my life completely. Pretty soon, people are going to notice his absence by my side, and I won't know what to tell them. What excuse I could even hope to make up, I don't know. I don't know what to tell people, where my husband is, or how to fix what I've done. I don't know anything. The only thing I do know is that Mikey and Annalise are in Lisbon right now, the same place they met and where they found love. While I'm here, sitting in the ruins of my marriage, waiting for my husband to come home and finish the job, to just spare me the uncertainty, hand me the papers, and end all of this for good.